The glass clinked against the silence like a warning bell no one expected. It was New Year's Eve. The table was dressed in white and gold, candles flickering, champagne poured, everyone smiling the way families do when they're performing happiness for each other. My father rose slowly from his chair, the way he always did when he had something important to say, chest forward, chin up, wine glass lifted like he was about to announce a business deal. And in a way, he was. He looked straight at me, smiled with all the confidence of a man who had never once been told no, and said the words that would change everything. Starting this year, you'll be financially responsible for your brother's situation. He's already under enough pressure. The room went still. Not the comfortable kind of still, the dangerous kind. The kind that holds its breath. Then my mother, without even looking up from her plate, added quietly, and if you decide to say no, don't expect to be part of this family anymore. I felt something shift inside me in that moment. Not shock, not panic. Something cleaner and colder than both. Clarity. I looked around that table at the faces I had known my whole life, faces I had worked for, sacrificed for, quietly bled for, and I felt it crystallize inside my chest like ice forming over still water. I smiled slowly. I tapped my glass once. I stood up. Then let this be my final toast, I said, voice steady, calm as I have ever been in my life, and the end of any money you will ever see from me. Every fork froze. Someone inhaled sharply. No one laughed. My name is Marble Knox. I am 31 years old, the eldest daughter, the dependable one, the quiet problem solver who never raised her voice, never caused a scene, never asked for anything, just paid and paid and paid. I am also the woman who walked out of that dining room on New Year's Eve and never looked back. And this is the story of how I got there and what happened after. Welcome to Revenge Chronicles. For years, my family treated my success like a shared bank account that only I was required to deposit into and that everyone else had the right to withdraw from. My promotions funded my brother's failures. My discipline cleaned up his chaos. My savings absorbed his disasters. And every single time I hesitated, every time I looked at a number that made me uncomfortable or a request that felt unreasonable, I was reminded how lucky I was to be in a position to help. I was told that family sticks together. I was told that I was strong. I was told that Theo needed me. My younger brother Theo had been going through something since college. That is how the family described it. Going through something. He dropped out twice. Started 3 businesses. Finished none of them. Every failure came with a label. Stress. Burnout. Bad timing. The consequences were always softened before they could reach him, wrapped in excuses and redirected toward whoever was closest and most capable. That person was always me. Rent gaps. Legal fees. Temporary loans that somehow never found their way back to me. I told myself it was family. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once he stabilized, it would stop. It never stopped. Meanwhile, I was building my life in the quiet hours no one saw. Long days. Missed holidays. Saying no to myself over and over again so I could keep saying yes to them. My parents praised my strength in the same breath they used to ask for another favor. They called me their rock. They called me their blessing. They never once called me their equal. The worst part was not the money itself. The worst part was that they genuinely believed I owed it to them. They had built a story in which my success was something the family had collectively earned, and withholding any part of it was a betrayal. That New Year's Eve dinner had started like all the others, comfortable, familiar, slightly performative. The champagne was already open. Toasts were being made. Theo sat beside my father, eyes fixed on his glass, quiet in the way he always got quiet when something was about to be asked of me. He knew. He always knew. He just never said anything, because silence had always worked in his favor. When my father made his announcement, the room around me went into a kind of soft focus. I heard the words, but my body processed them differently than it ever had before. Something had changed in me over those years of giving, something I had not fully noticed until that moment. I was done. Not angry done. Not emotional done. Done in the way a door closes when it is finally, truly shut. My mother's warning was the last piece. She thought it would frighten me into obedience, the way it always had before. Instead, it showed me, with perfect clarity, exactly who they were and exactly what I had been to them. Not a daughter, not a sister, a resource. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. I did not leave that table angry. That scared them more than anything I could have said. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past my windshield, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Quiet. Real quiet. Not the quiet of holding back tears or swallowing frustration or carefully choosing words so no one at the table would feel uncomfortable. This was the quiet of someone who had finally stopped running and turned around to face the thing chasing them. My phone began buzzing before I even reached the highway. Missed calls. Messages. Some guilty. Some angry. Some a combination of both that only people who have been caught in something they cannot admit to can manage. My mother's final text that night read, "You're being dramatic. We'll talk tomorrow." I pulled into my apartment garage, engine still running, hands completely steady on the wheel. Tomorrow, I realized, was when they would learn that I was not bluffing. And neither was the silence I planned to give them. The next morning, she showed up unannounced. No greeting, no hug. Just her coat still on, purse clutched tight against her body, eyes already sharp the way they got when she had decided in advance how the conversation was going to end. "Don't do this," she said, standing in my doorway like she was warning a child away from something dangerous. I poured coffee, sat across from her, waited. She sighed the dramatic sigh I had been hearing my whole life, the one designed to make the other person feel responsible for her discomfort. "Your brother didn't sleep all night. He's spiraling. And your father is embarrassed. Do you know how this looks?" There it was. Not concern for me. Not even real concern for Theo. Image. I reminded her calmly that I had already paid Theo's last 2 debts. That I had covered his legal mess in October. That my savings were not infinite and my patience even less so. She laughed. She actually laughed. "You make good money," she said. "You'll recover." He won't. That sentence landed heavier than any insult she could have chosen. It told me everything about the math they had been doing behind my back, the quiet calculation that had always placed my stability below his fragility on their scale of priorities. Later that same day, Theo finally called. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Just one line, delivered in the flat tone of someone who had never once had to fight for anything in his life. "Why are you punishing me?" That was when I felt the final shift complete itself inside me. Not anger. Not guilt. Recognition. I was not his sister to them. I was a function. I was the mechanism by which consequences were avoided and comfort was maintained. And the moment I stopped performing that function, I became the villain in a story they had been writing for years without my knowledge. 3 days later, my father made sure the message went public. He called an extended family gathering at the house, framed as clearing the air. I should have known better. Some part of me still believed, after everything, that honesty had value in that family. It did not. I walked into their living room to 20 familiar faces. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them smiling just a little too carefully, the way people do when they have already been briefed on one side of a story and are waiting to see how the other side will react. My mother sat at the center of the room like she was presiding over something official. Theo was beside her, eyes cast downward, performing the role of wounded innocent with the kind of ease that only comes from years of practice. My father stood and announced to the room that they were concerned about my recent behavior. He used my full name. Formal. Cold. He said I had chosen to abandon my brother during a fragile time. He said that after everything the family had done for me, this was how I had decided to repay them. Murmurs moved through the room like a current. An aunt shook her head slowly. Someone whispered the word selfish just loudly enough to be heard. I tried to speak. My mother raised her hand. "This is not a debate," she said. "This is about accountability." And that was the moment everything hardened inside me completely. Because they were not just demanding money anymore. They were rewriting history. They were standing in front of people who loved me and constructing a version of events in which I was the one who had caused harm, in which my years of giving were invisible and my single refusal was unforgivable. I felt my face heat. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the specific humiliation of being erased by the people who were supposed to know you best. I went home that night and did not cry. I sat on my couch, shoes still on, lights off, and I let every word they had used settle into me. Abandoned. Selfish. Ungrateful. Not once had anyone in that room mentioned the transfers. The receipts. The late-night calls when Theo needed saving again. By morning, the pain had finished becoming something else entirely. Focus. I opened my laptop and pulled up 7 years of bank records. Every payment organized by date, amount, and purpose. Rent, debt, legal fees, business restarts, emergency transfers at midnight. Then I pulled something I had never read carefully enough. The documents Theo had asked me to co-sign the previous year. The ones my father had assured me were harmless formalities. I read every line slowly this time, and there it was. Not just entitlement. Liability. My name attached to obligations I had never fully understood I was carrying. I did not need to shout. I did not need to expose them emotionally or make speeches or send messages to the extended family correcting the record. I simply needed to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own decisions. And once I did that, everything would move on its own. I closed the laptop calm and completely steady. They thought I was panicking somewhere in my apartment, overwhelmed and about to come back to the table with a softer answer. In reality, I was finally, after 31 years, done saving people who had spent those same years pushing me quietly underwater. I sent one email to my bank. Professional. Precise. Formally withdrawing myself from any future financial responsibility connected to Theo. Then I contacted a lawyer. Not to threaten anyone. To clarify. To legally separate my name from every obligation I had been guilt-driven into carrying. 2 days later, my father called, voice tight and unfamiliar in its uncertainty. "What did you do?" he asked. I let the silence stretch for a long moment before I replied. "I stopped fixing things," I said. By that evening, the fallout had begun on its own. Payments bounced. Doors that had always opened for Theo suddenly did not. My phone lit up with their names one after another, and for the first time the panic underneath their anger was impossible to hide. They were not asking anymore. They were realizing. And I sat there, heart completely steady, listening to their world wobble for the first time, knowing with total certainty that I had not pushed it. I had simply stepped out of the way. They showed up at my door together eventually. Both my parents standing in the hallway looking smaller than I had ever seen them, tense and unsure, suddenly unfamiliar with the version of me that did not move when they pushed. My mother's voice cracked first. "You didn't have to take it this far." I looked past her at my father. He would not meet my eyes. Theo was not with them. That told me everything I needed to know. "He's in real trouble," my father finally said. "And you're the only one who can help." I shook my head slowly. "I already did," I said. "For years." They left without another word. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, the silence that followed felt completely earned. On New Year's Day, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood alone by my apartment window. The city below was quiet and honest in the early morning light. I thought about that table, that toast, that threat dressed up as family duty. They believed my money was their right. They were wrong. It was always my choice. And choosing myself did not make me cruel. It made me free. I raised my glass quietly. Not in anger. Not in triumph. In peace. To endings, I whispered. And to never again confusing love with control. The year had begun in silence. This time, the silence belonged entirely to me. This was Revenge Chronicles. If this story spoke to something you have lived or something you are still carrying, drop it in the comments. You are not alone, and you are not selfish for finally choosing yourself.